Have you ever had a moment where the truth hits so hard you can feel it all the way down to your soul? Not just oh yeah, I should probably remember that kind of truth. I'm talking about the kind that causes you to freeze in your tracks and it rearranges something deep inside of you. I had one of those moments in late 2018, and it was the day I realized, or maybe really accepted, that my life matters too. My name is Alana Lynn, and this is the Ashes to Aligned podcast, a space for women who love someone struggling with addiction. This episode is basically the heartbeat of everything I teach and coach on. It's what I want every woman who's out there trying to save someone else while putting herself last to understand. Because this isn't just one lesson among many. It's the crux of why I do this work. It's the core of why I'm here. For me personally, the foundation for my lifelong caregiver first, me last pattern was poured when I was a kid. I remember lying upstairs in bed at night, listening to the lazy Susan that was built into the corner kitchen cabinet spin, and the liquor bottles would like cling, clang, clang against each other as the pots and pans that were typically at the front of the cabinet got spun to the back and the liquor bottles took center stage. My only scheduled visits with my dad were on Friday nights. And if they happened, one of our first stops would often be at the liquor store. I don't even know if minors are allowed in liquor stores now, but we were definitely back in the day, we were allowed. I even have this vague memory of my dad sending me in by myself once. Um, I mean, they would let kids buy cigarettes for adults back then, but they didn't let me buy the booze, and they definitely wouldn't let me carry out those brown bags. The clerk would always stop us at the door and make dad carry the bags out himself. And I was young at this time. I mean, my parents divorced when I was 8, and his drinking progressively got worse. So I was probably, I don't know, 9, 10, maybe 11 when I started to get really bothered by it. And I would lay in bed and think, after he went to sleep, maybe if I just went down and I dumped it all out, the problem would be solved. You know, the thinking of an 11-year-old, right? But then almost just as quickly, I would think, no, he'd be mad. He'd be really mad. And I was afraid he wouldn't pick me up on Friday nights anymore. And it was always kind of hit or miss if that was going to happen anyway. So I didn't want to do anything to upset him and jeopardize that. Now, to be fair, codependency often develops in children who grow up in homes where alcoholism or drug use is present, but that's not the only place. It can also happen in families touched by mental illness or chronic illness, divorce, abuse, or even just a lot of conflict. For me, I checked a couple of those boxes. We had the divorce and an alcoholic parent. But I can't lay my codependency solely at my dad's feet. That's not fair. I had two parents, and each of them had their own stuff. My mom grew up in an incredibly difficult home environment. So much of what she learned was just about survival, and she carried that forward into parenting the best way she knew how. I had very narrow guardrails when I was growing up. And as I became a parent myself, I understood why. She was strict because she wanted to keep me safe. She wanted to protect me, maybe in ways she hadn't been. But as a kid, I didn't know all that. I just felt the strictness, and I internalized it as don't rock the boat, don't upset anyone, keep the peace at all costs. And along the way, between the two of them, I learned to scan the room for other people's reactions before making a move. I learned that keeping the peace felt safer than telling the truth. And the biggest thing was, I felt like it was up to me to make everything okay and to keep everyone happy. I want to say something directly to my mom. because she watches this podcast on YouTube. Mom, I know you walked through things as a child that I can't even begin to imagine. And yet you still managed to raise me with the biggest pile of love imaginable and safety, and often at tremendous sacrifice. You did a phenomenal job, especially considering where you came from. And I know that sometimes when I talk about my childhood experience, it can sound like I'm pointing at the things that were hard. Please hear this. I have always seen your strength, the often hard choices you had to make along the way, as well as all the love that you poured into me that made me me. And I'm so grateful that I picked you to be my mom. I'm grateful for the mom you've always been, always my biggest cheerleader. And I'm grateful that we get to keep walking this healing journey together now. And before I move on, I want to pause and make something clear for everyone that's listening. Nothing I share here is about casting blame or pointing fingers, ever. The number one success principle is about not blaming, not complaining, but instead taking 100% responsibility for our lives. And that's the work I've had to do over the years, especially while going through my Canfield training. I've had to dig deep into my own story to look honestly at what happened, where I picked up certain beliefs, and how those beliefs shaped the way I lived. That work hasn't always been easy, but it allowed me to rewrite my script, to shift out of the old patterns that no longer served me. And because of that process, I can now take what I've learned and use it to help other women and do the same, to heal their lives, reclaim their power, and write a new story for themselves. And also, it's hugely important to me that you know my dad was an amazing person too. I've shared pieces of how his drinking shaped me, but that's only part of the story. He was also one of the kindest, most generous souls you could ever meet. In fact, there's no way I can capture all of who he was in just a few sentences here. So, in the next episode, I'm going to share more about him, the fullness of who he was, not just the parts that shaped my codependency. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people are never just one thing. And my dad deserves that fuller picture. So, back to that little seed of codependency that started in childhood. It didn't just grow a little, it sprouted into a whole damn forest over the years. That pattern of scanning the room, keeping the peace, putting myself last, it didn't stop in childhood. It followed me into adulthood. It made me a phenomenal partner and caregiver when my husband got sick. He had the fluffiest of pillows, and every blanket was tucked just right, and everything and anything he could possibly want, he got. If caregiving were an Olympic sport, I'd have brought home the gold medal for sure. And the truth is, I was built for taking care of him, even though I'm still sad that he needed me to do it. But it didn't stop there. That same pattern followed me into parenting. My oldest son was overprescribed pain pills after years of untreated Lyme disease. And let me tell you, I turned project manager of recovery into a full-time unpaid job. I tracked his meds. I researched alternative treatments. I made calls, monitored his activities like my life or his depended on it, which in my heart, I felt like it did. And then there was my youngest. After his tragic accident, he was desperate to numb the pain, and I was just as desperate to stop him from hurting. I threw every ounce of myself into keeping him safe. I became part-time bodyguard, part detective, part therapist. Basically, I was a one-woman react team armed with nothing but Google searches, worry, and a whole lot of prayer. And here's the kicker. No matter how much I did, it never felt like enough because codependency will convince you that you can save everyone if you just sacrifice enough of yourself. Somewhere in there, I met Millie. Millie has had the biggest influence on my life by someone who isn't family. Millie was my spiritual guide. She was a grandmother figure, and she was truth teller extraordinaire. Millie's the reason I moved to San Diego. My sons were in Orange County, just south of LA, which is about 2 hours, give or take, depending on the traffic drive from San Diego. So I told myself I was being practical and that moving to San Diego would put me close enough to handle the constant crises, but far enough away that my life wouldn't be completely consumed. Millie brought out the best in everyone, and she made me want to show up as the best version of myself. So moving to San Diego to be near Millie, to learn from her, was an easy choice. And one day she said to me, "Honey, you're always running around the garden trying to make everything pretty for everybody else, but that's not your job. Sometimes people just need to go through stuff so they can learn the lessons they came here to learn." And it landed. You know, I heard her. I can still hear her saying it, but I wasn't ready to let go of the reins quite yet. So I kept doing what I'd always done. I was running, I was fixing, I was over functioning. And another year or two passed until one morning, the incident I talked about in episode 6, I think it was, where I tried to get up and then I collapsed right back onto the bed because my body just didn't have the strength to carry me across the room. And in that moment, I heard that small, still inner voice say, "You could literally destroy yourself trying to save them, and there's still no guarantee it would work." I heard that voice, like I really got what it was saying, and I took it to heart. A couple of weeks after that incident, I had another morning incident. I think I lived in so much chaos and there was so much turmoil swirling around all the time. Remember, at that time, I was still living in the tornado. And the only time my higher power, or whatever you want to call that small, still voice, could get through to me was early morning when I first woke up and I hadn't fully engaged in the chaos yet. But one other morning, as I was getting up, I heard, "You're so busy trying to save everyone else, you're forgetting about yourself." That message didn't have the same punch as the first one, but it was like a little water and fertilizer on the seeds that had already been planted. They just hadn't bloomed yet. And so, for probably the next 6 months or so, from the outside looking in, it probably didn't seem like much was changing, but I was doing a lot of internal work. I poured myself into my Canfield certification. I wasn't just learning the success principles so I could teach them to others. I was using them to build a roadmap for my own healing. And then finally, probably around October or November of 2018, it happened. I was sitting on my bedroom. I was working on my Canfield training while also engaged in yet another one of those exhausting circular conversations with Dusty. You know, the ones where you go round and round and round and yet you go nowhere. And I heard myself. I looked over at him in the doorway and I said, "You and your life are not more important than mine, than me and mine." And I don't know who was more shocked, him or me, because it was obvious to both of us this time I meant it. Every cell in my body meant it. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a weapon, it was a boundary. And for the first time, I understood I could love him and love me. Those two didn't have to cancel each other out. Here's the thing about women like us: we've been taught a lie that says love equals sacrifice. A good mother abandons herself without complaint. Suffering is noble. And we've believed it for so long that we wear it like a badge of honor. But here's the truth I learned the hard way. You can still love someone and still choose yourself. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you're cold or selfish. It simply means you stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. After that moment, I doubled down on my own healing. I kept building my roadmap. I created a life that felt safe and grounded and calm for me first, and then my sons when they were ready to step into it. And that's the thing. I didn't walk away from love. I walked towards self alignment. And by doing that, I became the clearest, healthiest, most consistent version of myself that they had ever known. So if you're listening or watching right now and thinking, I could never say that to my child or my partner or my sister, I get it. I couldn't either until I could. Maybe no one has ever told you this before. So let me be the first. You matter too. Okay? Ask yourself, where have I been sacrificing myself in the name of love? Whose life am I prioritizing above my own? And maybe you don't start with a big declaration. Maybe you just start with a little whisper. Say it softly. Say it to yourself. My life matters too, because it does. It always has, and you are worth living it fully starting now. If this episode stirred something in you, I invite you to sit with it, journal about it, let it settle into you. And if you want to keep walking this path with me, subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode drops. We're not rushing here. We're not forcing. We're just gently but firmly reclaiming what's always been ours.